Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about some issues that affect variation or are cause of variation in language. So one of the issues that we said that we would discuss for this week is the issue of gender. So let's have a look at that. So language and gender is a super interesting topic to examine from a linguistic perspective for many different reasons. One of the reasons is that we can talk about, first of all, how languages make sense of gender. So how languages represent gender, it is not conducted across the same way universally. For instance, we can think of Spanish as being a gendered language. When we say that Spanish is a gendered language, we are referring to the fact that it takes morphological endings like I and O, and it communicates some kind of gender ideology with these, right? And we've also seen how recently these ideologies and also the very use of A and O has come under fire in contemporary Spanish language, right? But then other languages like English seem to not have this sort of morphological distinction in a noun or an adjective, right? So gender is expressed through the use of pronouns in English. And we've also seen a sort of revolution in this sense as well, of people appropriating the pronouns they want to appropriate, and of people explicitly stating their pronouns of choice in their emails at the end or in a letter, right? So we've been seeing a lot, a sort of gender revolution in terms of how languages represent gender, right? So we could talk about gender in terms of that, how it factors in or how it works inside of a language. Or we can also talk about our ideologies of what it means to be a man or a woman or any heteronormative construct of gender, and how language factors into that. So, from our perspective, a lot of us here are from Latino, Hispanic families, right? So there are these sort of roles that have been taught to us historically in our culture and conducted or passed through years. Sometimes these roles are learned implicitly by looking at what your parents are doing. And other times these roles are kind of taught explicitly. And language is a big part of this. So, for instance, in many societies, including Puerto Rico society, but also English-speaking societies, it's more often the case that it's more acceptable for men to curse, right? But if a woman does, it's seen as unattractive or uneducated. It's seen as a lot of different things, right? So, but it's more acceptable for men. This is one way that we could perhaps think about, this sort of relationship between language and gender, and how gender may contribute to variation in language. So men would maybe curse more because of the ideologies of what it means to be a man, right? Other tendencies that have been reproduced throughout the years through these ideologies is the idea that women talk more and men talk less, or it's not seen as macho or right, for a man to engage in longer streams of speech. However, women are more communicative. Another way that perhaps we can envision gender influencing language is the idea that women gossip, even though, we know that men do as well. But there's this almost expectation that women will have information that's secretive, right? And we've also seen this kind of stereotype of people from the LGBTQ community, right? So there's all of these ideologies that are attached to gender as heteronormatively speaking, but also gender identity. So we could talk about expectations. So the same way that there are expectations on how to speak according to place. So this is America, speak English, right? So this monolingual ideology that we also have in Puerto Rico, this is Puerto Rico, speak Spanish, right? So these kind of weird regional ideologies, we also have that for gender, even though it has come under fire since the 70s, 80s feminist revolution, right? So first, let's explore some claims. So perhaps some of these claims seem like stereotypes, seem outrageous, may anger you, but you could see how many people in society hold these ideas. So the idea that men interrupt women more than vice versa, women interrupt men. Perhaps we could see this happening because in our society, women have traditionally taken a more submissive role, and we have these even phrases that exist, de calladita te ves más bonita, like you look more pretty quiet, right? Women are more communicative than men. This is another ideology hinting at communicative, maybe emotional. Men do not give verbal recognition of the contributions in conversation made by women. So a woman can say something for a really long time, and then men are like, huh, like one-worded responses, right? Men curse more than women. Women gossip more than men. Women talk more with one another than men do. Men speak more comfortably in public than women do. And guess what? These are stereotypes, a lot of them offensive, but stereotypes that hold a portion of truth, right? A portion of how society has seen this relationship between language and gender, at least in the Western world, how we reproduce these ideologies and how we are challenging them as time goes on. So 2 key topics, again, as I said, when it comes to talking about genders in language is firstly, how gender comes across in language, in the language system. Do we have morphemes? Do we have pronouns that communicate gender? But then the second topic that entails gender is the conversational characteristics of men and women. So gender in practice, how do we construct our gender identity, or how do we claim whatever gender identity we want to claim through our language use by exploiting these ideologies attached to language, or these meanings attached to language. So first of all, a very important distinction that sometimes gets confused. There's a distinction between gender and sex. When linguists and socio-behavioral scientists talk about sex, they tend to talk about sex as a biological construct, right? So very down a set to physical characteristics, the anatomy, okay? So versus when we talk about gender, gender is more something that we do. It's a social construct. Within fields of cultural and gender gender studies and also the social sciences, this is how we treat gender. Today, there's a return to separate single-sex schools so this is a quote, sorry. This is a quote from 1998, a long time ago. So today, a return to separate single-sex schools may hasten the revival of separate gender roles. So general usage of the term gender began in the 1960s and the 1970s, increasingly appearing in the professional literature of the social sciences. The term helps in distinguishing those aspects of life that were more easily attributed or understood to be of social rather than biological origin. The linguistic origins of gender, however, maybe we can date them back to the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Protagoras, a Greek philosopher. They used the term masculine, feminine, and neuter to classify nouns, so to make sense of nouns, introducing the concept of grammatical gender. So here, gender is seen as a category, right, with the Greeks. Many languages specify gender, have this grammatical composition of gender. We can think about Spanish as being one of an immediate example, but we also see languages like Greek, German, French. These languages specify gender or communicate gender inside of a noun through morphology, all right? So Indo-European, which is the professed origin or father language to all of the languages of modern day, had gender distinction. Even this original language that we've theorized so far, what we've recognized is that it could have had gender distinction. Swahili, which is a language spoken in Africa, South Africa has 16 gender distinctions. So gender is a really big part of many language systems. But then many other languages don't have gender. So English and languages of the Austronesian origin. But gender appears on pronouns. So even though it doesn't appear in the noun as a morpheme, we have it as a pronoun, he, she, it. It for an object, right? So what other things does it refer to? Maybe when we're talking about something alien, or perhaps alien to us in terms of gender as well. Gender correlates with other perceptual and possibly grammatical categories like humanness, agentivity, and animacy. So the boy broke the vase. It was naughty. The boy became less human when they broke the vase because they were being a bad boy, naughty. Das Mädchen hat den Vase gebrochen. So we see it here as well. Does gender influence our perception of categories? Some people think that language can influence thought. This is a theory that's called Whorfian relativism. So I'm gonna write it down. The idea that language may influence or predispose us to think a certain way. This is called linguistic relativity, by the way. Like in modern day linguistics, it's called linguistic relativity or Whorfianism. but popularly, it has been recognized as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. However, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf, which are the people behind this name, never collaborated. And yet, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis as a concept is found everywhere. It was most recently found in a famous Hollywood movie with Amy Adams and another famous actor called Arrival. They referred to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, even though they never collaborated, and Whorf was a student of Sapir. So maybe that's why people confuse them, because they had similar ideas. So essentially the idea is, the most modern adaptation of this idea is that language may predispose us to think a certain way, our language, but it doesn't prohibit us from thinking differently. So we could perhaps think of something else that we don't have a word for, or we don't have the grammatical system for, right? But our language predisposes us to think a certain way. So who are the linguists that think that language can change our perception of gender? Borodowski, Smith, and Phillips, German versus Spanish gender. So perhaps in this paper, the question must be understood within the context of whether language influences thought. Sorry, I went up. So more on the Whorfian hypothesis. It says Benjamin Lee Whorf in 1956 is quoted, "We dissect nature along lines laid by our own language. The world is presented as a kaleidoscope flux of impressions, which has to be organized by our minds. And this means largely by the linguistic systems in our minds." So linguistic systems being our mental grammars, our mental dictionaries. So back to gender. This is from Mark Twain, talking about the German language. He is quoted describing the German language as following: "Surely there is no another language that is so slipshod and systemless and so slippery and elusive to the grasp. To continue with the German genders, a tree is male, its buds are female, its leaves are neuter, horses are sexless, dogs are male, cats are female, tomcats included, of course. A person's mouth, neck, bosom, elbows, fingers, nails, feet, and body are of the male sex, and his head is male or neuter according to the word selected to signify it, and not according to the sex of the individual who wears it. For in Germany, all the women have either male heads or sexless ones. A person's nose, lips, shoulders, breast, hands, and toes are of the female sex, and his hairs, ears, eyes, chin, legs, knees, heart, and conscience haven't any sex at all. The inventor of the language probably got what he knew about a conscience from hearsay." So if the German language has such rules for representing gender in grammar, then the idea is, how do German people perceive of gender then, right? Does this grammatical system impact the fluidity or fixity of gender for German people, right? It seems more fluid than, let's say, Spanish representations of sex in language. So Mark Twain continued, in German, it is true that by some oversight of the inventor of the language, a woman is female, but a wife, Weib, is not, which is unfortunate. A wife here has no sex. She is neuter. So according to the grammar, a fish is he, his scales are she, but a fish wife is neither. To describe a wife as sexless may be called under description. That is bad enough, but over description is surely worse. A German speaks of an Englishman as an Engländer. To change the sex, he adds in, and that stands for English woman. Engländer ring. That seems descriptive enough, but still it is not exact enough for a German. So he precedes the word with that article, which indicates that the creature to follow is feminine, and writes it down thus, die Engländerin, which means the she English woman. I consider that person is over-described. So again here, Mark Twain is talking about, from his perspective, he speaks the English language, he's criticizing the gender system, he sees it as a little bit on the, I guess the word is redundant. So overly expressing gender, is that necessary?